All right. According to my computer screen, we now have a live webinar. I'm Congressman Bishop, and I know a number of you have joined us out there via this Zoom call, this webinar, to be able to learn some information from experts at the Small Business Administration who have been kind enough to agree to join us about the second round of the Paycheck Protection Program Congress has authorized. You know, in Washington, I've been during my first partial term in Congress. Of course, have just started the second term, but have been on the Small Business Committee. And as a member of the Small Business Committee, my top priority since the dawn of the COVID pandemic has been to give small businesses the relief that they need in order to stay in business. And the core of that, as it happened once we passed the landmark CARES Act, I believe it was last April, was the Paycheck Protection Program. And it was a very large effort. I would say to you that it was, I think, in many ways, one of the most successful programs in the history of the federal government in terms of being able to move money into the private sector to the rescue of small businesses whose businesses were effectively shut down by the pandemic. And it happened extraordinarily rapidly, even though there are frustrations with it. And I'm sure many of you probably experienced those, heard about those, but it was enormously successful. In the 9th District, there were almost 15,000 paycheck protection forgivable loans made to small businesses. And the estimate is that the jobs retained as a result of that original run of the PPP, both the original one, we did actually supplement it with some additional funding, were about 180,000 jobs, a little bit more than that. But as the COVID pandemic has continued a lot longer, you know, when they first calculated the PPP loans, the legislative language provided for essentially 2.5 times a business's monthly payroll, and maybe they could use it for a couple of other things, but I believe that was the basic calculation. We have moved as of April, maybe by the end of June or into July, we'd be past the hard part of the pandemic, and we'd be back to business. And we have had business resume in significant ways, but it's been, you know, start and stop, and the pandemic continues to affect lives very severely and businesses as well. And so for a long time in Congress, we've recognized that there was a need for an additional support for some businesses to have a second round of paycheck protection loans. And so Congress, not as soon as I would have liked, but Congress has passed reauthorization of the program, another $284.5 billion to reopen and strengthen the Paycheck Protection Program, both for first and second time borrowers. Now, the big difference is now going to be effectively tied to how severely a business has been affected by having a revenue test, if you've had a certain impact on revenue that you can demonstrate. But these folks who are here with us tonight can give details, and they can correct any misstatements that I've made, but they certainly pass on to you the information that you need to apply, perhaps, or to guide others that you know in seeking additional relief under the Paycheck Protection Program. Before I begin, or before I turn it over to Mike Ariola of the SBA, let me also ask you who are listening tonight to, down at the bottom of your screen, you'll find there's a Q&A tab. And if you're interested in asking a question for these experts, we'll pick as many of those as we can and post them to this team, and they'll give you the information that you need. And I'll mention that again at the end, but let me just now introduce the folks who are with us. First of all is Mike Ariola, who is Acting District Director for the Small Business Administration's North Carolina District Office based in Charlotte, which, as you know, well, I guess, Mike, I'm not sure if it's within the district, but it's because I got a little piece of Charlotte in the southeast area, I think out in the Fairview Road area, if I'm not mistaken. Is that right? But Mike has served as a deputy district director in Charlotte for the last years. Prior to that, he was a senior area manager for the SBA in Western North Carolina, based in Asheville for 10 years. So he's got a lot of experience at SBA. And before Mike came to SBA, he had an extensive background in commercial banking. So I'm so grateful for Mike's willingness to come on to this evening. Thank you, Mike.
That's good.
And I also want to introduce to Karen Hoskins, who's a lead lender relations specialist, 30 years experience with U.S. Small Business Administration. So another very extremely experienced professional to provide information to you tonight. Thank you, Karen, for being here as well.
You're welcome.
And then finally, Walter Lara Figueroa is lender relations specialist as well. He has serves as liaison for lenders in North Carolina and performs community outreach to underserved communities, and has a great deal of experience with SBA. So Walter, thank you also. And so now, I think what I would, Mike, as we begin and before questions come in that we can respond to specifically, if you tell folks a little bit about this new round of PPP and who can qualify and whatever else you think might be most relevant to the folks who are with us.
Sure, I'd be happy to. And what I thought I'd do is just cover sort of like the basics of the new round of PPP and cover a couple of things. Rather briefly, we're going to talk about where we are and some key dates that have kicked in. I'm going to talk about first draw PPP loans and second draw PPP loans. I'm going to do a quick update on the SBA PPP loan forgiveness process. And finally, what to do now, additional resources, and then we can turn it over to Q&A. So Congress, of course, passed legislation to authorize the rollout of PPP round 2. And what we initially decided to do in terms of accepting applications was we first opened up the portal for PPP loans on January 11th to community financial institutions. These are folks like Self-Help Credit Union, M&F Bank, Mountain BizWorks, folks whose mission is to serve minorities in underserved markets. And then on January 13th, we opened that a little bit broader to second draw PPP borrowers. Then on January 15th, we opened up our loan portal to serve lending institutions with 1 billion or less in assets. And then as of January 19th, we opened up the floodgates and opened up our portal to all lenders capable of sending PPP loan applications. Key date is March 31st, and that's the date by which all PPP applications have to be submitted. So what is a first draw PPP loan? In a nutshell, a first draw PPP loan is one in which, with this round, this is the very first time you're going to be getting a PPP loan. So whatever borrowers were previously eligible will continue to be eligible this time around, although we've added a few more eligible types of entities to the joy of a lot of folks who are now eligible. Covered eligible expenses are expanded. What does that mean? Well, last year we said, as long as you use at least 60% of your PPP loan for payroll and the rest of it for eligible expenses like your business mortgage, business rent, transportation, utilities, then you can get the whole loan forgiven. And that was the whole principle behind the forgiveness of these PPP loans. With this current round, there's a couple of more expenses that you can fold into the mix. So with the current round, we say that provided your PPP loan is used at least for 60% for payroll, and the rest is used for those expenses I just mentioned, business mortgage, rent, transportation, utilities, plus any costs of your business addressing any federal safety or health guidelines. For example, making personal protective equipment available to your staff and your customers, you can throw that expense into the mix as well and get all of that forgiven. Another eligible expense that we've also thrown into the mix for forgiveness is, for example, if your storefront sustained window damage or graffiti as a result of some of the civil disobedience that some of our cities experienced last year, you can also throw that into the mix as well. So a couple of key developments there, two new expense types have been thrown in the mix so that provided you meet all those thresholds, the whole loan can be forgiven. Borrowers can now select a covered period within which to use the PPP loan proceeds anytime between 8 weeks and 24 weeks. So it could be 9 weeks, could be 23. And finally, as I mentioned, one must apply before March 31st or until congressional appropriation expire. Now, as I mentioned previously, whatever was eligible the first time around, they're still eligible now. But now there are some additional types of business enterprises that are also eligible for a PPP loan. Housing cooperatives, destination marketing organizations, which I used to know as convention and visitors bureaus, those can now apply for a PPP loan as well. And that's in recognition of just the heavy hits that they have taken as a result of the reduction in tourism and visitor activity. Certain 501c6 organizations, such as chambers of commerce, that came up a lot. When SBA in North Carolina was doing all this outreach to chambers of commerce and saying, hey, we've got this cool PPP loan for your membership to take advantage, a bunch of them came back to us and said, well, what about us?
You know, Mike, I heard a lot about that one myself, so I was really pleased that got straightened out.
Yeah, as are we, because the chambers of commerce are key partners of ours throughout the state of North Carolina. So I'm very pleased to see that. And also eligible news organizations. Typically, these are going to be your community-based newspapers and other media outlets. So all of those are the new types of organizations that are eligible for a PPP loan. How about a second draw PPP loan? A second draw is a situation where you got a PPP loan last time and you're going in for seconds this time around. That in a nutshell is what that is. And like the congressman mentioned, the loan amount is derived based on 2.5 times your monthly payroll for either 2019 or 2020, up to 2 million. So right here for second draw PPP loans, we're seeing a little bit more restrictiveness. The maximum loan is only up to 2 million. Also, we found that accommodation and food services types of enterprises, those with a NAICS code at the beginning, the number 72, we're going to be a little bit more generous with them and say the maximum loan that you can take out is 3.5 times your average monthly payroll, up to 2 million. And that's just in recognition of the fact that there's lots and lots of restaurants and accommodation types of enterprises that got particularly hit hard this time around. And finally, there's a special form for second draw PPP loan applicants to submit to SBA. Additional eligibility criteria. First of all, you had to have used or will use your first draw PPP loan for eligible expenses before the PPP second draw loan is dispersed. So that's a key thing. Also, we need to ensure that you have no more than 300 employees. So we're also bringing the size threshold down a little bit more. And finally, we need to make sure that your business, this is for second draw now, doesn't relate to the first draw. If you're going in for seconds this time, we need to have you demonstrate at least a 25% reduction in gross receipts between 2019 and 2020. What does that look like? Well, we need to be comparing apples to apples. So what you would do is you would compare either first quarter 2019 to first quarter 2020, or second quarter to second quarter, third quarter to third quarter. And as long as you can evidence at least a 25% reduction in gross receipts, you would be eligible for a second draw PPP loan. But notwithstanding that, you can also show a 25% reduction in gross receipts for the whole year of 2019 to 2020. And how you would do that is you would fill out your tax returns for 2020. You don't have to file it just yet. But that would be the way to evidence that 25% reduction in gross receipts because you've got the 2019 tax returns already filed. As I said, you don't have to file your 2020 taxes just yet, but make sure that when the tax deadline comes up, that whatever you use to prove that 25% reduction, you make sure that you submit those actual tax returns to the IRS. What is acceptable in showing a quarterly kind of apples to apples comparison? There's a couple of different ways that you can go about doing that. And our website, which I'll share with you in just a moment, has quite a bit of guidance in terms of how you would do that. One way that is, not sure how many businesses can afford this, but one way is to provide audited quarterly financial statements to the lender. One that I think is a little bit more reasonable, just in terms of all the small businesses that we worked with over the years, is to provide company prepared financial statements. And just like any other situation, when you're submitting those company prepared financial statements to the bank, please make sure that you sign them, because that is your certification that it's true and correct. So make sure that you sign every page of those company prepared financial statements. Okay. And in terms of forgiveness, just by way of an update, here are some things that I think our small businesses are really happy about. The first is that last year, with the SBA's direct economic injury disaster loan, we had the availability of grants up to $10,000 that we can help folks take advantage of. And I think it equated to like $1,000 per employee. When it came time to ask for forgiveness with the PPP loan, SBA came up with a rule that said, okay, if you've gotten an idle advance, you have to deduct that from the PPP forgiveness. And so what happened was a lot of folks ended up with a small loan balance that was owed to the bank, to the surprise, not only of the small business owner, but to the lender as well. So this time around, we're saying that's no longer deducted. That is no longer deducted from the forgiveness payment. Also, one of the things that's coming up, one of the questions that came up was, okay, so what do I do if I actually did include that advance into the PPP and it's already been forgiven? A couple of things. First of all, SBA will be making arrangements with your bank to credit your account for that. And if you have that loan advance, that small advance still outstanding as a result of last year, when you deducted that idle advance, I would say don't do anything with that at all. Don't touch it at all, because sooner or later, SBA is going to come through. We are going to discuss with your bank, talk to your bank as to which account to wire so that that loan will be paid off. So just don't do anything about that. SBA will make sure that you're made whole. And we'll also make sure that you're made whole in case you went ahead and paid off that loan. So that is the one big thing, big positive development that we're seeing with this new round of PPP. The other thing is, and it has to do with tax consequences. Forgiven PPP loans are not taxable income, so they do not count against you when it comes time to talk to the tax person. Also, any expenses paid with PPP loan funds are now tax deductible. All right, so very important savings to small businesses right there on the income side as well as the expense deduction side. So good news there, and you can consult irs.gov for any details on that. Expended forgivable expenses are permissible for any PPP loan not already forgiven. So remember, I was talking about, okay, now with the new round of PPP, you can pay for personal protective equipment, the cost of upfitting your business, as well as any expenses incurred as a result of damage from the civil disobedience. You can actually roll any of those to your PPP loan if it's not already forgiven. And finally, soon to come is a simplified forgiveness application, which is actually called for in the legislation for PPP loans up to 150, and we're working feverishly to put that up. Actually, it may have already been posted. Walter, do you know if it's been posted on the website?
It has.
Oh, cool. Yeah, great. Good to hear. So what do we do now? I would say that particularly if you're a second draw PPP borrower, your bank where you applied for the first loan, that is your point of contact, because again, SBA is not accepting these applications from borrowers. We're accepting this from the bank. So you apply to the bank, the bank applies, or the lender, I should say, not the bank. The lender applies to SBA. So wherever you applied for before, you should go back to that lender again for your second draw. You don't have to, but I would advise that because your first lender already has a file on you. And I'm hearing that a lot of banks have automated online application systems where, for example, if you go online to that bank's application to do another PPP and you start inputting your name and your EIN or your SS number, then automatically the whole application can populate because they've already got your information. So that's a terrific time-saving tool. You do not have to go to the bank where you got your first draw, but that would be I think that would be a smart thing to do as a time saver. If you choose to go to a different lender, or if you're a first draw PPP borrower, I would say check out SBA's Lender Match, sba.gov/lender match. It's sort of like a match.com to connect you with a prospective lender. It's not an actual application system, but it's a way for you to go on, say, this is who I am. I want $50,000 for this purpose. And all the lenders that have opted in to receive an application from, say Union County, North Carolina, up to 200,000, everybody who has specified those search criteria will be able to see your application and opt into contacting you to follow up. It's a very nifty tool. It's been around for several years now. Also, I think your go-to website for all things PPP, real easy to remember, sba.gov/PPP. And finally, to contact us, we are available for assistance, 704-344-6563, as well as via email at nc@sba.gov. One thing that I wanted to mention before I wrap up is SBA sponsors a host of resources for counseling and training and assistance. And all of these folks too can help small business owners with their PPP application, as well as general business counseling. There's the 15 small business technology development centers affiliated with the University of North Carolina that we partner with. We have 10 chapters of SCORE throughout the state that can also provide assistance. We have 4 women's business centers throughout the state in Asheville, Charlotte, Durham, and Fayetteville, soon to be 5. The 5th one that we just announced is going to be hosted at Winston-Salem State University. And we're excited that we're finally going to be able to have a women's business center up there on the Triad. And finally, there's the Veterans Business Outreach Center over at Fayetteville State University, which serves our veteran population here in the state of North Carolina. And finally, but no less importantly, we do not sponsor all the small business centers at the various community colleges, but we do a lot of collaborative work with them on an ongoing basis. So those are also available for assistance. And with that, I'll go ahead and wrap up. And do we want to go ahead and take some questions?
There we go. Sorry, I was muted. Thank you, Mike. I think that's a great idea. And thank you for that excellent presentation. I think it had a lot of core information in it. Let me ask you this, Mike. I remember monitoring the pace at which the money went out when PPP first appeared. And, in the first round of PPP, there was just this massive explosion of applications. The money was exhausted in a couple of weeks or something like that. And then Congress came back and reauthorized more. You indicated there'd been sort of a process to get this program going in terms of when the window was open to applications from particular sources. Do you have figures on where that stands? Is there still ample funds at this point in time for other folks to make their applications, or what?
Yeah, there are ample funds. Karen and I were just talking about this. I think so far, is it $5 billion that has been approved?
I don't have that email open. I thought it was 25.
25, yeah, out of about.
It was 25. Yeah, I'm pretty sure that was what it was.
Yeah,
but
yeah.
We have a big budget.
In either, again, if I gave the figure correctly from my notes, the 284.5 billion is the appropriation for the program this time. So we're talking, 10% or less.
10%, yeah.
Correct.
And there's ample time for people to get into it. It would appear. Let me ask this, Mike or Walter or Karen, whoever wants to take that. Mike, maybe you'll refer it. But for folks who are applying through a lender as they did before for a PPP loan, what can they expect in terms of the time around the turnaround to hear back about their loan application?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of different dimensions that are applicable to that, and I think this gets to how can I prepare for my PPP loan application. So we have the forms that are very clear. They say there's a set of certifications that folks need to pay attention to towards the end, and it says, I certify that I have no more than 300 employees, that I use my expenses for this, that, the other. I think the biggest piece of advice that I could give is for folks to put together a folder where they can store all of that backup information. you know, whether that's printing out a spreadsheet with your 297 employees, or, you know, keeping invoices of what expenses you paid for PPE or, you know, window repair, that sort of thing, because your lender might not request some of that stuff up front, but I can almost guarantee you they're going to look for that stuff when it comes time for the forgiveness process. So build a folder and assemble, you know, as long as you're looking for all the expenses that you're going to want forgiven, go ahead and save all of that and put that in a folder, because that will come in handy. So let's just say that after you've done all of that and you're ready to submit your application, you go to the bank. As I said, many, if not most banks, have an online application. So they will submit that application to the bank. And I'm not sure what the turnaround time is for banks. They're fairly well automated, right, Karen?
They are, but by law, or by the way the bill was written, the lender is allowed to take up to 60 days before they send it to SBA. And then SBA has up to 90 days to decision everything, and hopefully, you know, it can all be forgiven, and then they will get the money to the lender.
Actually, that's actually SBA.
Requirement.
Yeah. Is it the case that SBA takes up to 90 days for forgiveness?
That's what they're allowed. That's what we're allowed to take.
Yeah,
I think all of these are maximum, and I don't think they're running this long, but
Yeah.
that is the time frame that was set.
Yeah. Even at the front end, I mean, 90 days seems.
60 for the lender and 90 for SBA. That's the way it was written in the bill. But again, I just don't think it's taking that long, but
at least the experience under the original PPP, things, once they were rolling, happened a good bit faster in terms of the application to the approval point in time. Do you guys have any sense of how long it's taking in practice?
what do you
Yeah, I do not. Karen, Walter, I think you guys are very clued into the Office of Capital Access conference calls, or any. Yeah, I think that would probably take us, require us to survey the various lenders that are participating. We just don't have that data offhand.
Yeah. Okay. And I recall it was something that varied. I remember in the first round of PPP, one thing that was a problem at the beginning was SBA had this had something that, whatever the interface was between private lenders and SBA, was sort of, they're working the kinks out, but the kinks being worked out, my guess is that process is going to flow much more readily than it did before.
Yeah.
Mike, I'm sorry, go ahead, Mike.
I'm sorry, Congressman, if I could just interject. Last time around, we were using our older loan platform called eTran, and it was just inadequate for just the flood of applications that came through. You know, in a typical year, SBA in North Carolina will approve about 1,000 loans, maybe for $1 billion. Well, after that whole PPP cycle, we ended up approving about 130,000 loans for $12.2 billion. So if you look at North Carolina only, I mean, just the sheer demand, that is what created a bottleneck. And then, you know, I think just for the system to sort of, you know, get all glitchy and that sort of thing. We have resolved that. So now we've got a dedicated PPP platform that is used only for PPP, with a lot more bandwidth. Somebody was asking me, well, how do they compare? And I said, well, do you remember dial-up?
Dial-up versus gigabit Ethernet, right? That's what.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. So that, I think, is a very positive development.
Mike, you made reference earlier, and we have a question from one of our viewers on this subject, but you made and just for some people who may be on the call may not recognize the difference in the terminology, you mentioned the EIDLs, the economic injury disaster loans. And I want to make sure, I'm going to try to distinguish the two, and then you tell me if I've got it right or wrong. Economic injury disaster loans have been around a long time. They're loans that are originated directly by SBA as opposed to going through a lender. Isn't that correct?
Correct. SBA disaster loans are the only ones that are lent directly from SBA.
Yeah. And so I did note, at least my notes say that the legislation that Congress passed recently, in which in which the PPP was reauthorized in this additional 284.5 billion. There also is $20 billion to restart and extend the EIDL advanced grant for small business in low-income communities. And I know that other folks may have had an EIDL loan. You made some reference to that. They could have had an EIDL loan and the PPP, and how you deal with both of those confused some people. You addressed some of that. The question I've got here says, if you have an EIDL and you apply for and receive a second round PPP, do those funds need to go against the EIDL balance? Now, I'll be honest with you, Mike, I'm not sure I understand exactly what the questioner is asking. Perhaps you do. Does that make sense to you? Can you answer it if it does?
Yeah, do the PPP loan proceeds go against the balance? I would say no. I would say no. I definitely wouldn't expect them to use the PPP loan to pay off the EIDL. But they're two separate programs. Karen?
Yeah, they're definitely, I think where the confusion comes when we're talking about all the programs is it's the difference between the EIDL advance / grant. Those two terms are interchangeable versus the EIDL loan. The EIDL loan stays the EIDL loan, and they all have a 30-year repayment plan and a note and everything. But it's the advance that we're talking about is no longer, whatever the advance amount they had, they will not have to pay the advance back if they receive the PPP. If they receive. Now, this is not even an issue if you never got a PPP loan, but that is a really big benefit that we're able to now do. But we're only talking about that advance portion, which couldn't have been more than $10,000, because as Mike stated, it was $1,000 per employee up to a maximum of 10,000.
Yeah. So just to draw, Karen, let's draw another distinction there. So, and make sure I'm right about this. The thing about the PPP loans is that under appropriate circumstances, those are forgivable. Somebody can apply for forgiveness, and we were talking about that, Mike, that you could end up not having to pay that back. That was the way those were designed. An EIDL, an economic injury disaster loan, is repayable, but Karen, as you made the point, it's a very long-term loan. I think you said it's like a 30-year term. Is that what you said?
Correct.
And so if this person is asking, and I don't know if this is what they're asking, but if they're saying, if you got a second round PPP, would you have to use the PPP proceeds to pay back part of the EIDL? The answer to that would be no. You could use the money for whatever else for whatever's qualified. And provided you go by the rules in terms of what you use it for, it could be forgiven. Is that right?
That's totally correct. And that is right. There's very specific uses for the PPP, whether it's first draw, second draw, it's the same idea, 60% for payroll, because this is what Paycheck protection, that's what we're trying to keep these employees being paid, and then 40% for additional expenses. And I want to note too that as far as the mortgage payment, it is only the interest portion of the mortgage payment that is covered as a eligible expense. However, if they're leasing their facility, the entire lease payment could be eligible. So just want to make that distinction.
Yeah. Also, Karen, this came up during a webinar the other day. Somebody was asking, when you say mortgage, do you mean like personal? No, business mortgage.
And only the interest portion. So that can be very confusing, because obviously all our mortgage payments, if we're a business owner, we have both the P&I, the principal and interest. So it's just the
interest portion is an eligible expense.
Or like Mike said, for your business facility if you own it.
Right. And again, that's a question of what expenses are eligible for forgiveness of the loan.
Correct.
That you spend it on, right, Karen?
That is correct.
Okay. So another question submitted says, if looking into a second draw PPP, can the payroll data that was submitted for the initial PPP loan be used for PPP 2.0?
Yeah, the key there is under well, they would be going for a second draw loan. The key there is, well, they would have to show the 25%. Well, that's gross receipts. That doesn't matter. What do you think, Walter?
On that, what they would be doing would be, they can use that to determine their average payroll, but then they're going to have to prove that payroll for their covered period after it funds. What they mean by the covered period is, so if they use the 2019 payroll, right, and they had all their employees, let's say the payroll is 120,000, right? Let's just say that for 2000. And then what they would do is, then they would divide that by 12, because it's an average. It gives you 10,000. You multiply that by 2.5, it's 25,000. So that 25,000, but then during their cover period, they would have to show the expenses of the payroll for at least the covered period of eight weeks, at least 60% of that, before you can start, deducting other expenses like the mortgage interest that we talked about. And the key is, payroll means W-2 employees. It does not mean 1099 employees.
Good point.
That will be, your payroll will be found on your taxes, on your 941s. It's really the payroll taxes, what we're looking at. Your 1099 employees, they would apply on their own. So just keep that in mind, because there's a lot of confusion on that.
Okay. Now, another question asked says, should we seek and receive forgiveness of our first round PPP before applying for the second round?
Yeah, Karen, you want to take that one?
Yes, no, they do not have to do that. But the key is that they need to use the funds appropriately and exhaust the funds from their first PPP loan before the second PPP loan will be dispersed. So
Right.
that's the main thing they have to keep in mind.
Yeah, so if you have to have spent the money on the acceptable expenses, but you don't necessarily have to have gone through the forgiveness application and gotten that done.
You are totally correct.
Okay. And as to that, let me just reemphasize again, one thing that was a big priority for me on Small Business Committee is this simplified forgiveness. Now, Mike, you addressed it, but I'm just touching on it again. As I understand it, if you had a PPP loan under 150,000, basically there's a one-page form that you've got to fill out. I can't speak to the details of the one-page form, but that is true, right? We do have this simplified process for forgiving the PPP under 150,000, correct?
That is correct.
Yeah, and the form is at sba.gov/PPP. It's already up there, yes?
Correct.
Okay, yeah, I think that was another question that I just saw.
And
Oh, good.
the only
Good.
thing I would interject is just for everybody to read it carefully, read the form, read everything you're signing and stating, and fill out all the blanks. You don't want to, you're all going to be doing this electronically through your financial institution, but you just don't want to leave anything blank.
Yeah, it's something to be careful with.
Exactly.
Right. So I've got a question that says, if you applied for, received, but did not take the PPP funds first round, but need is there now, would this count as first round or second? Does that make sense, Mike? I think it makes sense.
If you applied for received but did not take the first round. That's interesting. That's a very interesting question. Karen, did you hear that? It sounds like they were approved, but they didn't actually take the PPP funds first round. So this time around, does their PPP application constitute a first draw or a second? I would tend to think that would constitute a second draw, because although they didn't get the proceeds, it was in fact funds that was committed.
Yeah.
What do you think?
I would really like to get back on that, because
Yeah, maybe we should.
Unless Walter, because I know there's an information notice that talks about being able to get an increase. And this is one of those situations, there's very specific situations, but potentially that might be one of them. And I would want to get back with John.
Yeah. We'll get the answer to Jim or something.
Yeah, and in fact, let me say this, and I'll say it for all the folks that are on the call with us or on the webinar with us. They can email my office and I will see to it that we get back to them and interact with you guys as appropriate to get the information they need. But I'm going to give them an email address.
Okay.
I could type it on the screen or something, but that's beyond me. But anyway, here's what it is. And this, I'm gonna say it slowly. I'm trying to give it so people can pick up a pen before before I say it. And I'll do it one more time at the end of this webinar. But it's rsvp.bishop@mail.house.gov. One more time, rsvp.bishop@mail.house.gov. So one thing, Mike, folks had asked about, as I saw in the chat earlier, were asking whether or not they could get a copy of your helpful presentation, your PowerPoint. And I don't know, that may be on your website somewhere that you could give it, but is that something we can get for those who ask us for it by email?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. I'll maybe send a PDF to your folks there, and yeah, you can distribute that to whomever wishes.
And so as to that question that we were just talking about whether that would constitute a first or second application, if you had made application, received approval, but did not accept the loan, whether that, and you then wanted to get a PPP, would it be first or second? It's a pretty technical question, but help the able folks at SBA will get that answer and furnish it to our office, whoever wanted to know that. If you'll take advantage of that email address I gave you earlier, and we'll repeat at the end, we'll make sure to answer that for you. So let's see now, Mike, I think you already answered this one. I saw it said, when will the simplified forgiveness form be available? And you gave the address. It's on your website now, I think you said.
Correct.
And then we got the next question from a viewer says, for the second round of the PPP loan, page 10 is payroll worksheet. There are questions for eligible state and local tax payments and federal employment taxes. Can you explain those categories? What are they looking for? That's a complex question.
Yeah. Would you mind repeating that, Congressman?
Yeah, I'll read it again as it says, and it may be that if we had the loan form, it would be more understandable what's being asked here. I don't know the loan form myself, but it says for the second round of the PPP loan, page 10, I assume they're talking about an application form. Page 10 is payroll worksheet. There are questions for eligible state and local tax payments and federal employment taxes. Can you explain those categories? What are they looking for?
Yeah, Walter, are you familiar with the contents of that? Yeah,
No.
I'm sort of trying to look up
The
the form.
application I'm glancing at for second draw borrower application form 2483 SD is 6 pages long. So I don't know, maybe it's just different because they're looking at their bank website or their financial institution website where it is. I'm not positive.
Yeah.
I'll tell you what we'll do.
Get that sent in too.
My able legislative assistant, Jim Warren, is in the room with me trying to interpret and so forth as questions come in. I'll see if he can get any clarification on that question before we conclude, but we'll move on to another one that we have. In fact, I'll tell you what, I'll use the moment to just repeat for that person in case we're unable to straighten it out. Would you send us an email at rsvp.bishop@mail.house.gov? That's mail.house.gov. And we'll make sure we get clarity on what you need. Got another question. Says, we already got one EIDL loan. Again, that's the Economic Impact Disaster Loan. Is it possible to have this increased, or can another one be applied for?
Yeah, as far as I know, any such talk about increases or additional EIDL loans are to be determined. Yeah, our folks in disaster assistance are still kind of finalizing that.
Very good. And I would say, let's see, we got another one coming here. I guess in the meantime, page 10 is the payroll worksheet. I guess we're still talking. I was looking to see if I could sort out that question or answer. We might be out of questions. Let's see what we got. Yeah. I am out. Jim, do we have any other questions coming at us for that base? We got it. Okay. All right. Well, let me just do this. I'll tell you, were there any other, Mike, any other points that came up, or Karen or Walter, that you wanted to emphasize or clarify from our conversation? I think folks have gotten a chance to ask the questions that were of interest to them, and some good information.
Not really, but I will. I do want to leave the audience with this thought, and that is, you know what? When a small business owner, finds the prospect of getting shut down, or indeed gets shut down, she risks losing her life's mission. She risks losing her life's investment. Potentially a chunk of money in the form of bank debt is put at risk. And more than that, all of the employees that she's responsible are similarly at risk. So she also has responsibility for the ability to enable them to put food on the table. And SBA is sincerely sensitive to that. We know this because they're our neighbors. These are our favorite restaurants. These are our hairstylists and favorite stores and that sort of thing. So it's, our mission in trying to get the money out to our struggling businesses as quickly as possible is something that all of us here at the SBA North Carolina District Office take very, very seriously. And I just kind of wanted to assure the audience of that.
Mike, thank you. Karen and Walter, thank you both as well. I think you're absolutely right, Mike. And we've been sort of spending time talking about just the, the dollars and cents, the mechanics of a financing mechanism to try to help small businesses survive, but it does bear repeating. And you're I think appropriately observed that, how difficult a time this has been in the life of the country, how many lives it's touched with tragedy, and how multifaceted this problem is. We've got obviously vaccines going on, hopefully gaining steam. I think things are going well. That's hopeful. We know there are all sorts of problems. We need to have children back in schools. It's a very difficult problem for our country. I'm grateful to the folks at SBA for the excellent work you do in taking on this task of trying to help people get what they need so that businesses can survive, and as soon as this is passed, hopefully thrive. I have one more question that popped up on the screen that I'll make reference to, Mike, let you make another sort of touch on again, because I think it's important, and we all know it up here in Washington, where we were focused on this issue a lot as the legislation came together. I know you all have heard a lot about it, but it is worth emphasizing or worth reiterating for folks who are out there, because there's been some confusion around it over the course of time. And that is if you've got a PPP, a Paycheck Protection Loan, and you've gotten forgiveness for it, that's not income to your small business. It's excluded from your income. And here's the other part: for the entire time until this latest legislation, the rule, according to the Internal Revenue Service, was going to be if you used payroll protection fund loan proceeds, the money that came from the PPP, to pay expenses, you weren't going to, as a small business, be able to take that as a deduction on your income tax return. And although it actually had a certain kind of consistency, that was an enormous source of complaint and agony for businesses across the country. So Congress did change that, and you still don't have to include in your income the forgiven amount of a PPP loan, but you do get to deduct those expenses that you pay with the proceeds of that forgiven loan. Now, this is a congressman talking, not a tax advisor, not an SBA expert. So I want to make sure I said that correctly, it's a point worth reiterating, because somebody did ask it. Isn't that right, Mike? I got that basically correct?
Absolutely. Yeah.
So thank you guys from SBA. I really do appreciate the work you do and your willingness to spend time with us here in the evening to share this information with people who are on the call. And I'm going to repeat just that email address one more time. If people will follow up with even questions they didn't get a chance to ask or didn't get answered during the course of the webinar, perhaps because I was incompetent in reading them, I'm not sure, but I got as many as I could. As I told these guys before we got on the call, we always need to make the congressman not look incompetent. We do enough of that up here in Washington on our own. But I was enjoying it very much. The email address, if you my very capable staff will act as a conduit to Mike and his staff, and we'll get the question answered. But it's rsvp.bishop@mail.house.gov. So again, my thanks to you guys for joining us. It's been a helpful conversation, I think, for many folks who are on. Everybody who's joined us, thank you for doing that. I look forward to seeing you back in the district. Bye now.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having us.